This is a quick demo on how to get Hasura running on Google Cloud Run. Now that Cloud Run has, I believe, subscriptions, so you can run WebSockets through to a Cloud Run instance, it's possible to just run Hasura directly on Cloud Run, and we can configure it with exactly one instance if you need it to stay alive for like the scheduled jobs and so forth. So what you end up is you'll get into Cloud Run and you create a new service and you have to provide a URL. Now, I believe, as far as I understand, we only can really provide a Google Cloud Run URL here. Sorry, a Google Cloud Container Registry URL. We can't provide just a regular Docker image. So if I go select, it's going to bring up other ones that I've already got. And you can see here I've already got Hasura, but I'm just going to show you the steps. So it's pretty straightforward. Let me just clear that. So if I go Docker pull and I grab the latest from Hasura, you probably want to go through and tag these properly, but I'm just going to do latest for now. So you grab Docker pull, then you go Docker push. Now I found this is basically the same thing that you would do for DigitalOcean. So for DigitalOcean, when I was using their app platform, they also required to pull directly from their own container registry. Just the same process. Pull down from from Docker Hub, and then push that same thing up to wherever it needs to go. So now this is done. This will be the same as what we had before, but I'm going to go through and choose that. So select here, and I'm just going to choose the latest. Done. So this means that we can now have exactly one instance running. So we have the container port, that's fine. I'm going to give it a 1 gigabyte with a single CPU. Remember, we're only running the Hasura instance here. We're not actually running the database. That will be on the Cloud SQL. So we can go maximum, let's just go 3. So go 1 to 3. The reason why I do set a maximum here is because unless you actually know that you need to scale, if you just have 100, then by all accounts you will get 100 if someone starts slamming your service and you don't have any sort of protocol in place to be able to stop them. So if you have performance issues, increase it. If you don't give yourself that ability to get the big bill. I'm going to leave all this fine for now, but this is effectively what you'd want to tweak over time. I always start with 1 and 1. Hasura is quite good, particularly with CPU, but it's also pretty good with memory. So if you start with 1 and 1, you'd be good to go. You can probably even bring it down if you're not actually doing too much with it. Variables and secrets, this is where you have to go through and put in all of your Hasura variables. So I would grab these from my instance I set up here in Hasura Cloud, sorry. So I can just copy these over now. That would be fine. And then connections, we can add the SQL connection this way. I did find this to be a little bit trickier. An easier way was actually to go through and create a VPC, and you can kind of read these instructions here. Create a serverless VPC connector. But if you create the VPC, then you can just use the local IP address of the where is it? Cloud SQL. Yeah, SQL. So you can use the internal local IP address because your Cloud SQL instance will also be on the VPC. And that's I found that to be the easiest way, and that would be the URL that you put into your environment variable here, so the database URL. That's actually better than going through the Cloud SQL connections. I just had problems with that. I think I've had it working before, but not with Hasura, with something else. So I'm sure I could figure it out, but effectively, yeah. This HTTP2 connections, I haven't actually played with yet. I did play originally with it. I think it was on Nuxt, but I was getting issues, and it's in preview anyway. So it's probably something to consider. But then that's it. Then we can go through and press next, and then we can get going. And let me see if there's any other options here I need to mention. Oh, okay, yeah. So you'd want to go allow all traffic and unauthenticated invocations. Effectively, you're on public access. You could potentially scope it to internal traffic only. Which I think is going to be reasonable if you have another backend service that is the only thing talking directly through to Hasura. In reality, you probably wouldn't do that. If that was the case, you might just connect to the database directly. But if you want to go through the GraphQL sort of setup, then that's also reasonable. But effectively, if you're running GraphQL, you're probably likely going to want that to access that from the client side, in which case you want to go unauthenticated and allow all traffic. If you do go with load balancing, I believe that's where you can add some extra security layers in between. Generally, I start with everything open, then I bring it back down for staging, and then I bring it back down for production after I've kind of figured out where the biggest risks are. But to start with, to go all locked down secure at the start can be really annoying to debug, particularly if it takes a while to kind of go through the iteration process of getting the service up and then testing it and finding it doesn't work and then going back down again. So that's basically it. To go through that again, you have service name and you choose your region, and then from here you need to choose your container image. To do that, you can just do that through pulling it down and pushing it up. And then if you want to keep it running all the time, which generally in most cases you would want to, you would set a minimum one and then a maximum of whatever you're comfortable with. Leave these the way they are. Add your environment variables just like you would on Hasura Cloud, and your SQL connection. If you go through a VPC connector, then you can just use the internal IP address that you get given from Cloud SQL. Actually, one last thing on Cloud SQL, just to be clear, when we create an SQL instance, there's a way that by default, so you can see here you've got public and private IP address. When you're connecting this, you want to use a private one. If we create a new one, I have to show this because it's kind of important. Firstly, there's incompatibility between Postgres 12 and 13. So if you create 13 here, then you try and pull it down to your local, and you only have 12 running on your local, then you won't be able to actually share those database dumps. You get this problem where you're trying to use PG dump and PG restore across versions. It gets messy. I've just been using 12 for now. It works completely fine. At the point when everything is updated to Postgres 13, then I'll be using that consistently, but I just try and keep one version consistently between local staging and production. Now, the thing I did want to show at the very end of this video, of course, we want to do in the same location. So I was in Sydney, and I can probably just go single zone unless I want to be super highly available. But here's the thing, by default, you will actually end up with a pretty expensive machine, something like $100 a month to run your database. May be required, but likely it's not to get started. So I would suggest coming into shared core and then do like probably 1.7 gigabyte, one vCPU. This will keep the cost pretty low. I think this is about $30 a month. This might be even like 15 or 20 or something. But once you start getting into these ones are going to be costing you high tens, in which case, if you're not particularly needing so, you may as well set up like a $5 Docker, a $5 DigitalOcean account and just run the whole thing on Docker Compose. Like $5 a month is better than spending about 50 on this for not really the same performance. There's a bit more scalability here, but at the same time, you're really going to be overpaying on Google Cloud if you're just trying to play with something. The good thing about Google Cloud Run is that it will scale to 0 if you don't set this. So if you scale this to 0, you're not going to be able to get the cron jobs working. So when we go into like events, these cron triggers and scheduled events, these won't work because your instance will just keep dying. It does persist the metadata in Postgres, which is kind of cool, but it'll be down. So it won't be until your next request that it will spin up the container, realize it's gotten over to your cron job, and then like start firing them off. So if you just want to have a play with it, Google Cloud Run will scale to 0, which is good, makes it cheap. But keep in mind that those features won't work unless you have minimum 1, in which case you're going to be paying for it, all the month anyway. And then same for the database. Choose your database accordingly. Don't go over this here. One core, 375 gigabyte of memory. That's about $80 a month or $100 a month. It's pretty expensive. Anyway, that's it. You'd go through, do this. When that's created, you would end up getting your public IP address, your private IP address, and that's effectively what you're going to be adding into your environment variables. That's it. This took a little longer than expected, but I just really wanted to show how this all works in Cloud Run, because I've used Cloud Run for a lot of things, and I found it a really nice experience, and it's nice to be able to get Hasura here too. All right, see you next time.